underwriting. Why again? Because otherwise, remember what Fitch found. You use normal underwriting, how many of those loans could you have approved? 0. You don't get any bonus. The exec doesn't get any bonus. The whole art is to destroy your underwriting system, to encourage the worst possible, right? WAMU, we say yes to anything. That was actually then our internal slogan, right? And as I said, you suborn the internal and external controls. Ultimately, there's a cover-up. Okay, this is completely irrational pattern for an honest firm. It maximizes what we refer to in economics and insurance as adverse selection. And this means the worst possible folks will come. And that means that your loans, which normally we teach in finance, that lending prudently has a positive expected value. But if you have adverse selection, it has a negative expected value. That's not a good way of, that guarantees failure. And you have reverse Pareto optimality. So let me say something nice about voluntary transactions. Voluntary transactions typically really do make both parties better off. Most situations. Lots of exceptions, we've talked about them. But most things in life, you're both better off. That's a really, really good thing. You get reverse Pareto optimality here. So you make one of these liar's loans as the bank. The bank is the principal, right? The bank is clearly worse off, right? Because it's not going to get repaid. So it's going to lose money. So one of the principals loses. That's not good for Pareto optimality. But the key is reverse Pareto optimality. The borrower also loses because you're bringing the borrower into a transaction that they can't possibly repay. And you're bringing them in at the worst possible time in the most hyperinflated bubble. And this is why this is the leading form of destroying working class American wealth in America, the bubble and collapse of the housing market. So both principles are made worse off, the reverse of what we expect in economics. Who's made better off? The agents, the unfaithful agents in all of this. Now that's the intended scam. But there are also unintended scams going on. Because if you gut your underwriting and you have a compensation system that gives incentives to the worst possible loan brokers, and you're degrading the ethics constantly, they're going to cheat you too in ways you didn't anticipate. And this is why the Fastows of the world are nearly always found at these big frauds, right? You're attracting a pretty scummy group of folks. These are not the brightest guys in the room or the smartest guys in the room, the way the titles of those books say. These are the least ethical guys in the room. And if you don't think they'll cheat you, you are incredibly naive. And on top of that, it's like opening the vault door and telling the world, hey, we got no controls, free money. You will get external frauds who will come in and say, oh my God, there's no underwriting here. Yeah, of course I'll get huge amounts of money. More subtly, the leading way in America we learn of frauds, now this should be scary, is by whistleblowers. Think executive compensation in the modern era doesn't just go to the CEO. In fact, it's quite distinctive in America that it often goes to junior officers as well. Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, I have just enlisted a whole bunch of folks who are really expert in how to inflate earnings and asset values, right? The CEO often doesn't know much about accounting. That part of their defense is true. But I've just created an incentive structure in a large bank for 5,000 people who know a lot about accounting to find ways to goose the numbers, because their bonuses would be much larger. And I have complete deniability. I have never ordered them to do that. There's no memo trail where I did. In fact, I issue orders that are the opposite, reminding my employees to do the very best at all times and have the most ethical. Have you ever looked at the ethics code of Enron? You can get it online. It's a great one. Doesn't have anything to do with reality, right? So we get this enlistment function. We get this deniability function. You're never going to have a successful prosecution on that, right? Unless the CEO writes, I know that people are cheating because of my incentive structure, and they're not that stupid. Right? But the other thing you get back to whistleblowing is, am I going to blow the whistle if I'm going to blow my bonus? Well, sometimes, yes, because whistleblowers are actually the kind of folks sometimes willing to do it. But am I willing to deny all of my peers and friends in the organization their bonuses by blowing the whistle? Sometimes, but not very often. That creates wonderful, if you think of it as an anthropologist or sociologist, that is really ideal in quashing whistleblowing, our leading way of discovering fraud. And so we pay attention in America to whistleblowers, but in reality, where were the whistleblowers effectively on this crisis as well? Right? They were very effectively quashed by this system. So you're going to maximize loan losses because you're going to be making loans to people that aren't credit worthy. You're going to produce this Gresham's dynamic that tears down the ethics of the professions as well as the executives. So the lawyers are going to be less ethical after all of this, and it isn't just going to be in this sphere and the current other folks. This whole doctrine of the very conservative economics that private market discipline was everything and would solve all these problems. You can't have efficient markets if there's accounting control fraud. And so the answer of proponents of efficient markets was then fraud must be impossible. The market must spot and end fraud very quickly. And it's complete circular, naive reasoning, right? But this is why they're so opposed to thinking of fraud seriously, because if it does, it destroys all of the major pillars of modern finance, as taught in neoclassical economics. You're not just going to defeat private market discipline, it will become actually perverse, right? So private market discipline existed in China with infant formula. What did it do? It drove honest firms out of business, right? It will hyperinflate and extend the bubbles. It will make markets in the technical sense of the word deeply inefficient. They will misallocate capital to very poor purposes. And here, think of what fraud really is. If I'm going to defraud you, what I first have to do is get you to trust me. And then I have to betray that trust. And as a result, there's no more effective acid for getting rid of trust in a society than widespread fraud, particularly by our elites, our CEOs, the top attorneys, the top audit firms, the top rating agencies. All of them end up being degraded by this process. And when we degrade trust, there's a vast literature about what happens with trust. Let me just talk about the finance side of it really briefly, and I'll end on this. Akerlof, in his classic article on Lemon's Market, for which he got the Nobel Prize, pointed out that this loss of trust can cause markets to shut down. Markets fail